Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I hope that you're well. It's Rabbi Akiva Males. Today is Wednesday. It's the 28th of May. I don't know where the month went, and we're getting ready for Parshas Bamidbar. We're going to start the fourth book of Chamisha Chumshei Torah, the five books of the Chumash. We're going to be starting that this Shabbos, and we also know that Shavuos is just around the corner. So I'm hoping that one of the Divrei Torah that we share today, we'll see that it can really be applicable to Shavuos as well. So let's jump right in. So Parshas Bamidbar begins as it's oftentimes referred to by an English name, as numbers. There's a lot of counting that's taking place in this Parsha and also in this book of the Chumash. And we're going to see that. We're going to start off today by looking at two Divrei Torah from the Tosefes Bracha. Tosefes Bracha, again, a reminder, was written by Rabbi Baruch Halevi Epstein, who's the same author of the Torah Tamima, and later in life, he had additional Torah thoughts, and he put them together in this Sefer Tosefes Bracha. We're going to see these two, and what struck me about these two first Divrei Torah we're going to see, what really struck me was just how straightforward they were, that he has some very, very good question, and he's going to answer it with a very practical answer, not referring to any Gemaras, not referring to any Midrashim, but telling us, no, there's a straightforward answer that's right there. And I think we find that many times in life. Sometimes we imagine answers to be far more complex than they need to be. I know I've experienced that many times, and sometimes just the simple answer is the one that is not just good, but it's really the best one. And I thought this was a great illustration of that. So let's jump right in. This book of Chumash begins in Bamidbar, counting all the Shvatim, and the Torah tells us now we're up to Pasuk Memphis, Pasuk 42, where it's talking about the children, the descendants of Naphtali, because it's going through all the tribes and it's doing a counting of them, letting us know just what their ranks were. So it tells us B'nai Naphtali, of the tribe of Naphtali, what was their numbers? Told us some mishpachosam, lebeis avosam, b'mispar shemos miben esrim shana v'mala kol yotzei tzava. So that's the preface. It says the same it does this for all the other shvatim. It says, okay, now we're going to discuss this shevet, we're going to discuss this tribe, and we're going to discuss lebeis avosam. What are the descendants of the father's house? How many from 20 years and up? Now, what the Tosefes Bracha is going to point out is that there's one difference here. If you were to take out a Chumash and look at all the other Shvatim, there's a letter that appears before B'nai. Before we discuss every tribe, we always say Livnei. It would say with a lamed, Livnei, as for the tribe of, as for the sons of, as for the descendants of, Livnei. For all the other tribes, there's a lamed in front. For Naphtali is the one, it just says B'nai Naphtali. That's all it says. And I've seen that there are many commentators that are bothered by this question because this is in stark contrast to all the other 11 tribes that are listed before it. It says livnei, to the sons, as far as they're concerned. And here it just says b'nei. And there are many different approaches that are out there, and some of them are using some fancy footwork to come up with answers. I was just so struck with the simplicity of what the Tosefes Bracha does here. And as I said, sometimes I think we've all experienced this, is we imagine that answers to the questions we have need to be far more complex than they sometimes are. Sometimes there's a very straightforward answer, and that's what Rabbi Epstein does here. Let's take a look. So he says, B'nai Naphtali, he says, B'chol Hashvatim, with all the other tribes, Ksiv livnei, the lamed betchila. It says livnei with the lamed in front of the word b'nei. Vikan, this is the one tribe. In other words, we've just if you look at the 41 psukim that are before this, when they go through all the shvatim, none others does it say b'nei. It doesn't say b'nei Ruvain. It doesn't say b'nei Menashe. It says livnei Ruvain, livnei Shimon, livnei Menashe. Why here does it just say b'nei? The Efshir Lomar, he says you can possibly answer as follows: Mishum da'ad acher apakuda lo hayu Yisrael b'midbar chonim l'shifteihem ala seder. Until after this accounting is done, at the beginning of Sefer Bamidbar that we read about the Shabbos, there was no designated order to the encampments in the wilderness. From the time they left Mitzrayim until now, they were not segregated by tribe. They were just everyone. You're friends with this one. You've got relatives here. You got friends there. Everyone was chummy with everybody. There was no distinctive camps where everyone needed to be. Ki'im ba'arvuvia. Everyone was mixed together. We fled Egypt. It's not like we fled Egypt in an organized fashion. We're done. We're done with slavery. We left it behind, and we left. We didn't organize. Okay, we're gonna all the people from Reuven and Gad. We're gonna stick together. All the people from Menashe are gonna stick together. Everyone was together. It was one big chant. Therefore, this week's parsha he wants to propose. This is when they start doing an accounting for each shevet. This is when they start now separating, and we're going to encamp by the shevet. So he says, "L'chein." Therefore, when they needed to count every tribe and figure out how many males did they have over the age of 20 to figure out, what their numbers were in terms of putting them to service. Hayu machrizin shema shevet. They would call out, okay, we are now doing an accounting for the tribe of Reuven. We are now doing an accounting for the tribe of Shimon. Mishayu mimanu, and whoever belonged to that shevet, hayaba v'nimna v'nirsham. They would step forward, and there would be some table where they would sign in, and they would step forward, be counted, and be signed in. V'zehu be'er lashem livnei. That's when all the other shvatim, that's why it says livnei. Klomar, what does that mean? Shoyu machrizin. We got a big challenge, and now they would call out, okay, mishuhu livnei shevet Ruvain, anyone who's from the tribe of Ruvain, Yavo v'yimneh, step up so you can be counted. And once they stepped up, what does that mean that they've done? They've just now formed a segregated unit. V'chein mishu livnei shevet Shimon, and then they get to the next tribe, which is Shimon. Livnei shevet Levi, v'chein lahala. They go down the list of all the shvatim. The shevet Naphtali. What do we know about Naphtali? Nimna achron lekulam. Even though Naphtali wasn't the youngest, Binyamin was the youngest. But if you look at the order of the counting, we'll soon see why the order was the way it was. But when you see the order of the counting, Naphtali is the last tribe to be counted. Kivi Shemora Pasuk Zeh. Like this Pasuk, Memphis proves. They've counted all the other Shvatim, and now they're counting Naphtali. Vatam, now the reason why Naphtali was counted last is we'll get to that in a second. We'll explain that in a second. But in the meantime, he says Naphtali is the last one to be counted. Once all the other shvatim, once all the other tribes have been counted and have gone their own way, is there a chalent anymore? No, all that's left is Naphtali. After every group has gone on to their encampment because they've been counted, Nisharu b'nei Naphtali levad. All that's left is b'nei Naphtali. They never had to make the announcement. Okay, anyone who's from Naphtali, now's your time to step forward. All that's left is Naphtali. That's why they never had to write livnei. Rak b'nei, klomar b'nei Naphtali nishru kach v'kach. We've just counted the other 11 tribes. They've all separated themselves, and now I don't have to say that announcement. Okay, anyone who's from the tribe of Naphtali, step forward at the table. Anyone who's left, I already know by default is Naphtali. So now I can just say, okay, b'nei Naphtali. You guys are all b'nei Naphtali. Let's do a quick counting of who's here. But I don't have to ask you to step up from the crowd and separate yourselves from the crowd and step up. So livnei seems to designate that I'm asking, now we're calling upon anyone who's from this shevet to step up, separate yourselves, and come forward. I didn't have to do that for Naphtali because they were the last one to be counted. And if you look at the order of the psukim, by the time we get to Memphis 42, that's exactly what's it. Naphtali is the last one to be counted. Why he's the last, we'll get to in a minute. So the Erev Rav was never counted. Because again, what we're doing now is we're designated by the 12 Shvatim. There was another section that was designated for the Erev Rav where they all encamped, but they're not included in these numbers that we're doing now. Now he says, last paragraph, Viraya lebeir zeh, what might be a proof to this idea that I'm proposing? Shechen b'mifkad sheni, if you look at the second time that the Jews are counted in the book of Bamidbar, it's in Parshas Pinchas. Shekvar hayu mesudarin l'shivteim. they already were all set up and segregated and in their individualized encampments. Lachar mifkad zeb barshakan, because that all Pinchas is in a couple of weeks. That's all taking place after they've already been set up, segregated, and put into their individual encampments in this week's parsha. And we know this from Balak because it says, which is the parsha right before Pinchas, because it says there, Vayaris Yisrael shochen l'shvatav, is that Balak, that mercenary, Bilam rather, that mercenary prophet, looked out, and what did he see? The Jews all set up in an organized encampment. So in other words, by the time Pinchas comes, they're already organized, because that's what's happening at the beginning of the Sefer Bamidbar in this week's parsha. Therefore, you don't have to make an announcement saying, please step forward. As opposed to here, that's what they needed to do. Therefore, in Pinchas, when it sets up and gives us the numbers, by all the tribes, it says Binei, velo livnei. Over there, they've already been segregated, so we don't need to use that expression of livnei. Therefore, there it uses for everyone, it uses the term Binei. So what he's proposing is livnei means I'm asking you to step out from the chalon, step out from the mix, and now we want to figure out who is everyone from Shimon. Now go off to your section. Now I'm asking all the Yehudas to step out from the mix and go off to your section. When I'm asking you to step out, that's when I say livnei. But Naphtali, by process of elimination, he's the last shevet. We don't need the term livnei, just b'nei. And then he says, what's a proof? Later in Sefer Bamidbar, when they are making an account that after they've already been segregated and put in their encampments, there the Torah never uses the word livnei. It just uses b'nei. Because when we're just doing an accounting and we already know that everyone's segregated, there's no reason to say, okay, everyone, I need you to step up out of the crowd. That's a different function. So when we're just doing an accounting and it's an organized group, we can say binei. But when I'm asking you, before I can do that accounting, you've got to step up and separate yourself from the mixture. That's livnei. That's his proposal. It makes a lot of sense. It's a very straightforward answer, and it makes a lot of sense. And again, as I said, when I was looking around this week, I did see there are a number of commentaries that are bothered by this question, and they've got wonderful answers. But what just struck me about this was the simplicity of it, and very straightforward, and it makes a lot of sense. Now, what he alludes to is that he said, what I have not explained, though, is why was Naphtali counted last? And he says that's what he's going to do in this next paragraph. In other words, it's clearly Reuven's counted first, he's the Bechor, I get that, but we're not going in chronological order, otherwise Binyamin would have been last. Why is Naphtali last? So here he says a nice idea. And again, this is a very straightforward idea. He says, B'nai Naphtali, Tama davar sheshevet Naphtali nimna la'achrona. What's the reason why Naphtali was counted last? Mipnei sheseder haminyan hayolefi seder hadigalim. He goes, if you look at the order in which who was counted where had to do with the order set up of their flags. Now, we know that there were 12 tribes that were set up to camp around the Mishkan. The Mishkan's in the middle, and then there's 4 directions, so there's 3 on each side. And Parshas Bamidbar begins by telling us, okay, that means there's 4 sides, so there's going to be, so to say, 1 chief in each direction, and underneath the banner of each chief would be 3 Shvatim. So in other words, there would be 1 chief Shevet of that direction, either north, south, east, or west, and under them would be their tribe and 2 other tribes. So you'd have 3 on the north, 3 on the east, 3 on the west, and 3 on the south, and that gets you to 12. So that's the way we clearly see things are set up according to their banners, their flags. So he says as follows: the order in which Bnei Yisrael are being counted is the order in which their flags are listed. That's he says what becomes very clear when you look at all this. So he says as follows. So he says, Parshas Bamidbar, and that'll spell itself out in what we're seeing here. V'degel Naphtali, and the flag of Naphtali haya ha'achron. That was the last. Kimavur la'alon Parshas Beis. Pasuk Chavtes. You'll see that later in Perek Beis and Pasuk Chavtes. V'tam davar zeh sheyadaglo achron lo nispar. But the Torah never speaks out straight out why was it that Naphtali's flag was last? Meaning, when they were traveling in the Midbar, so you would have, I found a site, this is a non-Jewish site, but I thought it was just, I was surprised I didn't see, sometimes in the back of the Chumash, they'll have an illustration of the encampments, and I was just surprised. I thought in the art school, they've got so many beautiful illustrations in the back. I thought that they would have something like this, but they didn't. Here I found it online. It was in some, I'm sorry, I found this after I printed out the sheets, and it was just printed, it was on a non-Jewish Bible study site, and it just says going according to the verses which three were on which side. So he says, okay, so let's say for example, Naphtali, it comes out, we're saying Naphtali. So again, here's the Mishkan in the middle. So here's north. So there's three tribes that are camped to the north. So there's Dan, Asher, and Naphtali. Now Dan is the chief of the north. And that's why it's called. He says he was the Maasef L'chol HaMachanos. It was the Dan banner was the chief of the north. So the Dan led the group that was north. Now, just because it's in the north, what that meant though is that they traveled last. Okay, so Dan was in charge of the group who traveled last, but within the group of Dan who's traveling last, which Shevet traveled last? He says it was Naphtali. So he says as follows: what's the reason in God's infinite wisdom? Why was it that he said it makes the most sense for Naphtali to be the one that travels last? And I thought this is a great proposal. So last line, V'yitaken lomar, it makes a lot of sense to suggest. Mishum dekiyadua, it's well known. Hayeshevet zeh kal b'raglav. Naphtali, what's the symbol of Naphtali? Was a deer or a gazelle. It said Naphtali ayala shlucha. That's what Yaakov blessed them. They were likened to a gazelle or to a deer. And in fact, in Yiddish, Naphtali, what is the Yiddish name for Naphtali? It's a Hirsch or Hertz. That was always like a Hirsch was a deer or a gazelle. Why? Because that was seen as being swift. So it says Naphtali always had this reputation, and that was the blessing that Yaakov had given it. They were blessed with swiftness. Kamosha Kasav Parshas, like it's written in Parshas Vayechi, Yaakov blessed Shevet Naphtali in Parshas Vayechi. Naphtali ayala shlucho. That he said that they're swift like a gazelle, like a deer. Therefore, it made the most sense. Halach lachrona. It made the most sense. The tribe that's in the back you want to have is the one that's been gifted with speed. Why? Ki ula yira lefanav eza siba umara shetzarich lamod b'derech olamaher alicha. Maybe they'd have to remember this is before modern communication. You couldn't just send a text message, so it made the most sense to have the one in the rear, the one who's able to make double time. If they need to quickly send up to the group, send a message. Hey, there's a reason why you've got to stop, or there's a reason why you've got to move quicker. You got to keep moving on. It would make sense to have the party in the back, the one who's most gifted with agility and speed that would be able to get up there. Yeah, they would be able to rush forward and give word out to everyone, so they would be like the signal corps or something of that. These would have been the best messengers. In other words, whoever's going to be in the back has the gift of hindsight, you could say. The one who's in the back has the gift of being able to see the full picture of where things are heading, where things are going, or they might know something that's in the rear. Oops, we missed the turn. We gotta go this way. You want to have a party in the back who's got the ability to swiftly spread the word amongst the others. So that's his theory. I thought that was a very, very interesting theory as far as that goes. But again, what I loved about this Tosefes Bracha was really that first piece, how he was dealing with a discrepancy in the psukim. He sees that there was something different about Naphtali than all the other shvatim, and whereas so many other commentaries offered beautiful suggestions, but his was, I thought, just a very straightforward, simple approach that just makes a lot of sense. All right, I want to share another beautiful Dvar Torah that I saw, and we're going to see, this is going to take us on a little bit of an excursion into some Jewish history, but it'll also hopefully help prepare us for the holiday of Shavuos, which is synonymous with the giving of the Torah. So let's see. So a little bit later in the Parsha, in Parak Daled, the 4th chapter, it says, V'zos asu lachem. So it says, after telling the tribe of Levi, within the tribe of Levi, there were different Levite families, right? There was Gershon, Kahas, Merari. So there was different families within the tribe of Levi, and they had different tasks when it came to transporting the Mishkan and all of its components. They had different tasks. And what the Torah is telling us here is everyone's got to stick to their tasks. Don't jump and take other tasks. It says, V'zosasu lahem v'chayu. This is what you need to do in order to live, v'lo yamusu, and not die. B'gishtam ala kodesh hakdashim, when they approach the Holy of Holies. Aaron uvanav yavo v'samu asam ish al v'dasov al maso. So Aaron and his son shall first come and appoint each man individually to his task and to his load. So basically, keep to your assigned tasks. That's what that's being told to the Levium. There might be almost a Yetzer Hara in there to say, well, I don't want to do my task. I dealt with the menorah last time. I want the Aron this time. There could definitely be something of that nature. Yeah, I think we could all picture people we know, just having a hard time with instructions. And now it just says, I'm telling you, keep to your assigned tasks. Make sure they've got this message very clear. So let's see. Here's a piece. We're going to use this to start off. This is from Tam V'Datz. This is Rav Moshe Sternbach. He lives in Yerushalayim for many, many years, lived in Johannesburg. So he says as follows, so it says over there that, again, make sure to appoint everyone individually about what their task is and what their load is. The way the Medrash explains this pasuk, and many of the commentaries go on at length about this, had Moshe and Aaron not assigned to all the families of Levium, given them specific tasks, letting them know, your job are the beams, your job is the menorah, your job is the mizbeach, your job is the Aron. If we hadn't given these tasks out specifically, everyone would be shoving and pushing one another, lizakos b'meleches kodesh zu, in order to have the merit of being involved in this sacred task. And they would have found themselves engaged in all sorts of fights and quarrels, pushing and shoving. And this would have angered Hashem so much that Hashem could have brought down punishments of death. Lakach Nemar. That's why the pasuk is saying v'samu asam ish ishal avdaso, is that Hashem is telling Moshe and Aaron, make sure, give out defined roles, defined tasks for all the Bnei Levi. Make sure each family understands exactly what their job is. Mikan lamanu. From this we learn shegama mitzvos, that even when it comes to mitzvos, even if it's a task that's being done for the sake of heaven, yesh li zaher, one needs to be very careful, shaloli kashel beriv machlokas, not to get caught up with fights and with quarrels. One may have made the mistaken assumption that, oh no, you only have to tell people not to shove and push when they're giving out ice cream. But when it's something for a mitzvah, who would push and shove when it comes to that? And he's saying here, the Torah is making it very clear. No. Make certain, because why? Because you could call it, there's this Yetzer Hara. Everyone says, I want that suchus, I want that merit. And then boom, next thing you know, you got pushing, you got shoving, and it's dangerous. There's fights going on. And Hashem could get so upset with that he could bring death. But snuim moshchim yadeim agam, and people who are tsanua, meaning people who are modest, but in this context doesn't mean modest. It means people who are pious, really want to act pious. Moshchim yadeim, they will decide to cease and desist and to pull back. Hagam shemasirim dover mitzvah. If you say, I'm not going to do the mitzvah. In other words, if doing this mitzvah, engaging in this mitzvah is going to become a pushing match, I'd rather not have this mitzvah. That's called the mitzvah ba'abba ba'avera. That's getting a mitzvah by means of an avera. It's not worth it. It's not worth to corrupt my character, and it's not worth it to step on someone else's feelings and hurt them. For what? To do a mitzvah? How will God value that mitzvah if the way I earned that mitzvah was by stomping someone else and pushing it? That's impossible. Uschara nimnoi mimachlokes, and the schar, the reward of pulling back and saying, I'm not going to engage in this in order to prevent machlokas, prevent fighting, Rav Yoser. That's even greater than the reward they would have got from the mitzvah. So he says there's a very important principle that it can be learned out of this. And now he's going to tell us who was the person in the last couple hundred years who most personified this teaching and strove so hard to ingrain this teaching to the students. V'shemanu al Agon Rav Yisrael Salanter. There are many stories about the great Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, that Jewish ethicist who was known as the father of the Musar movement, who reintroduced and put a value on the study of Jewish ethics, where things had fallen to the side in the 1800s. So he says Shamanu al Salanter. There are many well-known stories about him, but one specifically, says here Avel, that he instructed in Avel lebal yichanes lemachlokes ulemeriva. He instructed in Avel, someone who was in mourning and he had apparently some rights in shul to serve in some capacity. He instructed that Avel, you'll do a greater merit for your parent if you basically pull back and stay away from machlokes. There he goes, begin amiras kaddish. That's even more important than saying kaddish. Shevitir hu tikun yotzer gadol lenifter. That being mevater, by passing it up and taking care of someone else's needs and making sure to prevent machlokes, that's even a bigger zechus, that's a bigger merit for the soul of the departed than saying kaddish for that person. So he's giving some vague reference to a story involving Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, teaching that it would be important to pass up some merit of Kaddish in order to prevent machlokes. But as we saw there, it's quite vague. He didn't give us much in the way of detail. What I want to do now is explore with you what was Rabbi Yisrael Salanter so famous about in this regards, and then we're going to see what may the specific incident of the Kaddish have been. So let's take a step back. We're going to look at the next source is on the bottom of page 2. This is from a sefer called Sarei HaMe'ah. I'm sorry, I was out of order. We're first going to see what was the story of the Kaddish that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was known for, and then we're going to say in a broader context how this was part of a much larger group of teaching that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter was renowned for. So we're going to get first to the Kaddish story. I have seen this in a couple of sources, and I searched on one of the online libraries that I have to see who might say the story over most clearly, and this is a source that I saw. It's a sefer called Sefer Sarei HaMe'ah. It's kind of a book of biographies about famous rabbinic personalities. This was written by Rav Yehuda Leib Maimon. He was in the early days of the state of Israel, or Maimon. I don't know exactly how to pronounce his last name. Rav Yehuda Leib Maimon, I think was how to pronounce his last name. He was one of the leaders within the early days of the state of Israel in the religious parties who was championing and creating curriculum for education in the schools and in the yeshivas that were being set up in Israel. So this is a sefer. I found it online. He's got a much larger biography, but I can't do justice to it right now. But this was a fellow who did a lot of good for the Jewish people. So let's see. Here he brings down what was the story that was a well-known story that had, I guess, been passed from teacher to student, from the students of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter and in all the Musar yeshivas. What was this story about the Kaddish? So he says as follows: Bichlal, it was in general. Rabbi Yisrael Zahir Ma'od. Rabbi Yisrael was exceedingly cautious. B'mitzvahs gemilas chasadim, when it came to the mitzvah of sharing kindness. Be'ezu tzura shiyah, no matter what form that presented. We oftentimes think of gemilas chesed as lending someone money or sharing. I've got some extra snack, and I see another kid in school who's hungry, sharing some of my snack. That's what we often think of gemilas chesed. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter went beyond that, and he looked at mitzvahs. And they say over his students shared the following story. Ki pamachas nichnas Rabbi Yisrael lebeis medrash. Rabbi Yisrael once came to the shul lispalel to daven v'lomer kaddish biyom petiraso shalaviv, and to say kaddish on the day of his father's yortzeit. Harav Rabbi Zev Wolf, who was his father, was a famous Rabbi Zev Wolf, was a great Talmud Chacham in his own right. So Rabbi Yisrael comes to shul to say kaddish for his father on the day of his yortzeit. Now, I just want to pause for a second. The original minhag Ashkenaz, and as far as I know, the only place you'll see this is in, let's say, Breuer's, Kaladas Yeshurin in Washington Heights. They still maintain this. Most everyone else has done away with this because, as you'll see from the story, this can lead to a lot of difficulties. The original minhag Ashkenaz was only one mourner said Kaddish at a time. We're used to the idea that all the someone sometimes some shows will clap and say Kaddish Yasam, and everyone exactly they'll say it as a group. The best way to do that would be, and I've seen shows do it. They'll all come to the center together because that way they're all at the same pace. Because if one's here and one's there, they can't always hear where everyone's at, and it becomes hefker. But the original minhag was only one person at a time. And the Gabbai would go around at the beginning of davening, find out from people who has to say Kaddish. And then there would be a rating in terms of who has precedence. Is it a yortzeit? Is it within the year? Is this for a parent? Is this for a sibling? Is it for a child? There's a whole pecking order that you'll find this in halacha who has precedent. The only area where we still use this pecking order is about who leads the services, because you can only have one shliach tzibor. But as far as saying Kaddish, almost every Nusach Ashkenaz shul has adopted the practice, which really was originally Sfard, of all the mourners just saying together. Why? Because you can see this leads to some very emotional things. People get very emotional when it comes to anything involving death, dying, and memorials for loved ones. And you could see machlokas, and you could see people saying, "Okay, I'll do a break-off minyan in the lobby because I want to say Kaddish." Right. And so, in the only place that I'm aware of, and I'm sure there's more that really want to keep to Minhag Ashkenaz, but I know in Breuer's they say this is Minhag Frankfurt. We keep Minhag Frankfurt is that if someone comes in at the beginning of the day, let the Gabbai know who if they have to say Kaddish, and then the Gabbai has, okay, let me write this down, who's got what, and he makes an assessment, and he'll hand out a card. Okay, you have this Kaddish, you have this Kaddish, you have this Kaddish. And if someone would jump up to say Kaddish when it's not their turn, they'll get silenced. That's not our minhag. You're going against the minhag here. We have a way of doing things. This was the original minhag Ashkenaz. I don't know exactly at what point in history this change kicked in, that even shows that daven minhag Ashkenaz all the Yisomim, all the mourners say Kaddish together. I don't know when. I have seen some people have a theory that this began after the terrible massacres of Tach V'Tat, those 1648 massacres, because there were so many people saying Kaddish during that time. I have seen theories that was when this started to change. But again, that would have been 100 years before Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. So there must have been some shuls. Now again, Rabbi Yisrael Salanter spent a good chunk of his life in Germany. So even if he was famous for being born in Kovna and being in Eastern Europe, but he gave that all up and basically is a fascinating, this for another conversation. He spent a good last couple decades of his life away from Lithuania in Germany, where he was basically involved in Kiruv, involved in Jewish outreach. So here was this towering Rosh Yeshiva, who was this Talmudic genius of Eastern Europe, who basically left that all behind in the hands of his students. And he says, you guys run this. I want to get involved in Jewish outreach, and went to Germany, which had been ravaged by assimilation and reform at that point. So it could very well be, they don't give an identification of where this occurred. This could have been in Germany, where again, they were still keeping the real minhag Ashkenaz of one person saying Kaddish at a time. Okay, be that as it may, Rav Yisrael Salanter comes to Shul, and it's yortzeit for his father, and he says, and so he's prepared. He's going to say Kaddish. He probably told the Gabbai. But he took note of the fact there was another person in Shul. She'oso yom haya yom hamisa shalbito was the yortzeit of that man's daughter. Uva gam hu lomar Kaddish, and that fellow also wanted to say Kaddish. And here's this father grieving for a daughter who passed away, and it's on the yortzeit. Avalafia din, according to the letter of the law, kodemes haisa zechuso shel Rabbi Yisrael b'amiras Kaddish. Yortzeit for a parent comes before, on the pecking order, comes before yortzeit for a child. Mikivan shezeh hayu yom hazikron shel nishmas aviv, because that's for a father, for a parent. Ra Rabbi Yisrael, what did Rabbi Yisrael say? Also Adam Meitzar V'Dog. That person was a wreck. When he found out he had come to Shul to say Kaddish for his daughter, who he loved so much, and then he finds out, the Gabbai tells him, no, there's someone who's got Kaddish for a parent here, and points to Rabbi Yisrael. Rabbi Yisrael saw how crushed and downfallen this person was. She'eno yachol lomar Kaddish liloi nishmas bito, that he wouldn't be able to say Kaddish for his daughter. What did Rabbi Yisrael do? Viter Rabbi Yisrael al zuchuso. He passed up. He gave his card, the Kaddish card. He gave it to that fellow. He let that fellow have the Kaddish card to say Kaddish instead. People right away started to run. say about this guy? He's obviously doesn't think Kaddish is a big deal. He just gave up his Kaddish card. So people start to murmur. Rabbi Yisrael mizalzel ba'amiras Kaddish. They start to say, look at that. Rabbi Yisrael, he doesn't he doesn't think Kaddish is important. B'yom tiras shalaviv, on the day of his own father's yortzeit. Higiu advarim loznei Rabbi Yisrael. Rabbi Yisrael begins to hear some of the murmurs. V'nenev amar, and he decides to respond, and he gives some kind of a public answer. He says, I have to explain what I did. I don't want anyone to get the wrong impression. He says, Chas v'shalom, chashuv alai amiras Kaddish. I really do value the saying of Kaddish. I know how important it is. However, avol zechus zu, but this zechus, shenis galgal al yidei Abba, that this zechus that my father is the catalyst for, that I have the ability to give another Jew the ability to feel better and not feel downtrodden. Zichrono Levracha, my dear father goes, I'm bringing more zechusim to my father by embracing my fellow Jew, and by lifting him up, I'm giving my beloved father more zechusim. Ligmol chesed im adam Yisrael, because I'm enabling him to share chesed with another Jew, ulafiget tzaro, and to play some role in releasing and relieving some of the pain that Jew feels. Chashuva yoser memeya kadeshim. That's worth more than 100 kadeshes. That's what it said. What a beautiful lesson. So that's a beautiful lesson. So what's he saying? He's saying is don't lose what's that expression? Don't lose the forest for the trees, or right? Is that you're getting caught up on Kaddish? But what's even bigger? What's even bigger than Kaddish is relieving another Jew from feeling bad. The zechus that'll give to the father's neshama up in Shemaim is worth 100 kadeshim that he was able to do this. And this, we're going to see, this was a key teaching of Rabbi Yisrael, and this is what Rav Sternbach was alluding to. What did Rav Sternbach allude to? Again, what did he say? The lesson of this pasuk was, he was saying, is that someone might make the mistake of thinking when we're involved in Shem Shemaim, Avodas HaKodesh, mitzvahs, there's going to be pushing and shoving? Come on. And he's saying, yeah, there will be. So you better make sure to keep order. So he says it was well known about Rabbi Yisrael that what did he hold? It was worth it to withdraw sometimes, not get involved in a mitzvah. Again, is there a mitzvah? He wouldn't say, I'm not going to keep Shabbos because it's going to hurt someone's feelings. You have to keep Shabbos. But here, where it's something like this, when it came to Kaddish, he's saying that I'm not going to say Kaddish. I'll find another way to honor my father's memory that's even stronger, that's even more potent, and that's in a way to let this other Jew have this Kaddish. That would be more. That seems to be what Rav Sternbach was referring to when he just said. Look back at his words. He says, "V'shamanu al agon Rav Yisrael." We heard about Rav Yisrael Salanter shehizir, that he was careful. Shehizir avel, that he cautioned an avel. It was himself he was talking about. He says that he cautioned an avel lebal yichnas lemachlokes, to avoid entering into machlokes lemariva, begin amiras kaddish. When it comes to saying kaddish, sheviteru, that passing up on this tikkun yoser gadol lenifter is even a bigger benefit for the departed. It's not that Rav Yisrael taught this lesson to someone else. He did this himself. He says, I'm going to teach others by doing this by doing this himself. Now we're going to see now. This was part of a much larger philosophy of Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, and then we'll have time. I want to share with you something that I remember witnessing as a 19-year-old that I still can't wrap my head around. So let's see, we're on page 3. So this is from a very famous set of work. It's called Sefer Tnuas HaMusar. It was written by Rabbi Dov Katz. It was I think it's either a 5 or 6 volume history on the giants of the Musar movement. The first volume is dedicated completely to Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. I either have the set at home, or I used to have the set at home. I got to check. I believe I still have the set at home. I don't think there was a number of Sfarim years ago that I saw that I was running out of shelf space and I was no longer using, so I donated to a yeshiva that was just beginning, so they would have in their library, and I would vicariously get zechusim from the people who were going to use those Sfarim because I wasn't using them. So I donated a lot of Sfarim. I believe I still have this set at home because this is a classic. So I believe it's either 5 or 6 volumes, and Rabbi Dov Katz was a student of the Chevron Yeshiva. He survived the massacre, and he wrote these 5 or 6 volumes about with the history of the Musar movement. Because again, the Chevron Yeshiva was a branch of the Slobodka Yeshiva, which was one of the premier Musar yeshivas. So it was a 5 or 6 volume history about the great personalities and figures and whatnot that within the movement. It's all on Hebrew. Yeah, but I do think they translated parts of it. I've never seen, I don't think I've ever seen a full 5 volumes, but I have seen parts of it. You know what? If you remind me, I'll try to find it. I definitely have seen parts of it. Yeah, and this is a great source because Rabbi Katz was very meticulous in terms of finding his sources. So a lot of times when you want you hear something about Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, I go to that volume 1 to see, okay, does Rabbi Katz bring it down? And because he probably has done a good job of stuff. So I tried looking in there. I couldn't find, again, this was just a very quick perusal of it. I couldn't find this Kaddish story in there. But again, I was searching online by just entering the word Kaddish. If I looked more carefully at home, I might find it there. But what I did find here was this was part of a much larger philosophy of his. And let's see. So it says, Be'ikar, it was well known. Hay Rabbi Yisrael mistayeg mikol sarach osan averos b'shas kiyum mitzvos. He would do everything he could to distance himself from accidentally doing an avera at the time you're trying to do a mitzvah. In other words, he was asking people to be very aware, very mindful of their surroundings. Don't be a bull in a china shop, and just really be focused on that. In my effort, my great zeal to do a mitzvah, don't do an avera in the process. So he says, midarcham shal anashim. It's one of the well-known habits of people is when a person is very eager to fulfill a mitzvah that is it's upon them to do. Merov hislavusam, because of their great zeal, vadikusamba, and the fact that it's coming from a good place, they really want to fulfill this mitzvah. They're so excited about it. Oftentimes they don't take the time to look around. In lo krucha ekav osa mitzvah, if attached to those actions to fulfill the mitzvah, is a pigia b'zchus mishu. Maybe I'm also knocking someone over. Maybe I'm hurting someone in this process. B'mamon, maybe I'm hurting someone financially. B'kavod, I'm denigrating someone's honor. B'hana, or I'm taking away someone's enjoyment from this world. V'yesh asher nechshalim liyitim krovim mibli mesim mitzvah babavera. There are many times where it makes more sense to desist. Don't get involved. If I know that by doing this mitzvah in this great effort, I'm going to hurt someone else, don't do it. Because the damage that I will have done to another person it's going to do more harm than good. It's going to take away any benefit I hope to accomplish. If I if I hurt another person in this process, what did I do? This is a quote, I believe, from Mishlei, saying that that God is disgusted if in our efforts to try to do some mitzvah, I'm going to do averas in the meantime. And he didn't direct these just to like bores, the people out there who were just, I'm thinking, as I said, bulls in the china shop. He says, let's say, he goes, let's say someone in an effort, they really want to get an aliyah to the Torah. He says, or tefillah l'fnei amud, or they really, really want to daven for the amud, or amiras kaddish. This is also where I saw this, where he says, or they're so eager to be the one to say kaddish. Lavo l'dei meriva. They're going to get themselves into a fight about this. He says, "Listabech b'chavilo shel averos b'mida ma'isa," and they're going to get so caught up in so many terrible character traits and so many terrible actions. Kigon, for example, kas. They're going to start to use the terrible trait of anger, sinas chinam, baseless hatred, kashus oref, being stubborn, lashon hara, speaking bad about others, habanas panim, embarrassing others, gezel. And they'll be involved in stealing. Zechus harabim or yachid, they'll steal from the community or steal from the individual. Ma'asim eluhem lamata mikol bekoras ve'en lamod aleim. These are so beneath us. In order to conduct ourselves in this is such behavior that's beneath us, and we should never be doing anything of this nature. Ulam yesh asher gam talmidei chachamim uvakim. But however, he goes, that's something that everyone could get caught up in. He goes, but there are times even great scholars hamedaktikim b'mitzvah kala chamura, who are so cautious not to do anything wrong. Nechsham said they also make these mistakes sometimes. How? Toch shetef v'shigra. Sometimes they're caught up in the flow of they want so badly to do this mitzvah. Because they're not giving enough thought. They're so focused on the mitzvah, they're so focused on that opportunity to get close to Hashem that they're not giving thought to what's going on around them, and they could do so much damage. And he was begging people, please don't lose your surroundings. Be cognizant of what's around you and where you're going. Let's see one more paragraph. This is just a couple pages later. He says, here's an example he gives. There was one time that Rabbi Yisrael was davening in one shul for mincha. Ra Yehudi nichnas b'chipazon. He saw a Jew running in, lachtov kedusha, because he didn't want to miss kedusha. So this fellow came running into shul because wow, I got to get kedusha. V'toch merutzaso, and because he was stampeding to get in there, darach al raglav shel mishu, he stepped on somebody else. V'lichlech es na'alav Hamitzu. And this fellow had a perfectly brand new pair of polished shoes. And this guy's in such a hurry to get in there and hear Kaddish that he stepped on this guy's shoes and basically ruined his shoes. Yeah, we've all had that when we've got a brand new shoes and then they get nicked and you get a nick in the leather. It's like, if 6 months from now, I won't care because they're already beat up. But they're still all shiny and new, and now they got nicked like that. And he says, and this guy it felt terrible. So Rabbi Yisrael saw this happen. Achrei Tfilas Mincha, when the davening was over, Pana Rabbi Yisrael al Yehudi Yazeh Ve'erlo. Rabbi Yisrael turned to this guy and he pointed out to him, She'alav lefatzosa sa'ish ala nezik shegaram lo. You owe that fellow money for the damage you caused him. V'osifo lezeh, and he added to this, Shad kama shatia chashuva amiras kedusha, as important as it was for you to be in shul and to say kedusha, ki ma'avedes es kol erka. You just lost whatever you gained from it, you just lost. As imal yada yisovev lemishu is a nezek otzar. If you caused this guy financial damage or pain, you just lost all that. Like so you're such a hurry and such zeal to do this mitzvah, but whatever you gained by this, by literally stepping on this other fellow, you missed this. And I remember when I was in yeshiva and in high school, I remember hearing this from so many of my teachers, hearing this so many of my Rabbi, these ideas from Rabbi Yisrael, how careful we have to be about this. And I remember to this day I struggle with this. There are entire communities of people that I guess these teachings have been lost upon. Either they never were part of that Lithuanian Muslim movement, so they never heard these lessons in the first place, or that whole world was annihilated in the Holocaust for the most part. And when things did rebuild, it seems as if some aspects of this kind of got lost in the shuffle because we got to focus on other areas, whatever it was. But it bothered me so much. I remember, and I'll just share one incident here. I remember I was studying in Israel, and it was like my first year after high school, and there was a very famous rabbi who passed away. And we went, I remember a bunch of us from Yeshiva, we went to the funeral. I'd never seen something like this before. The pushing and shoving that was going on at the funeral because people wanted to have the merit of holding the beer. It's almost like a stretcher because in Israel they don't bury in the coffin. The body was wrapped up in shrouds and then the talus, and there was such pushing and shoving. And I remember I was horrified. Like me and my friends, we were kind of off to the sides, and you could just say, okay, Israel's a rough and tumble place. Like you gotta, that's the whole society. It might be that way. It's the strong survive. That's Israel. But at the same time, I was horrified. It got to be so bad. And then when they lowered him in, people wanted the zuchus of shoveling in dirt. There were fights going on about who could get the shovel next. There was pushing and shoving. One fellow's hat, I remember seeing this, fell into the grave, and he had to climb into the grave to get his hat out. And I remember just being horrified, thinking to myself, like, what was that worth? What was that worth? Whatever you think you got. And now you have to climb into the grave on top of him to go get. And I remember getting back to yeshiva, and a number of us were just kind of just in shock and sitting down with one of the rabbis in yeshiva and saying, like, explain to us what the heck is going on in this country. Like this is not what we were fed. This is not what we were raised on. This is not what we're used to. He didn't really have a good answer for us. He goes, I'm sorry, I have no way I could excuse what you saw. He goes, you can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. There's a lot of work that needs to be done, and there's a lot of reasons I could use to explain why people aren't as sensitive what they need. But you're right that there's no excuse for that. There's no way to excuse it. But I could come up with all sorts of reasons why I think society has
led itself in that direction. But it's important to know that we once had princes among us. We once had nobility walking around, and that was Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. He was, I mean, just I've seen descriptions. That same Baruch Halevi Epstein who wrote Tosefes Bracha, I once saw an account that he wrote when he was a young boy studying in a base medrash in Vilna when he goes on for about a page describing this majestic, noble-looking person who didn't have a speck of dirt on their coat come in, and he asked the gabbai if he could see, and he brought him out a certain manuscript to look at, and they found out afterwards because everyone was crowding around to see who is this person, what's he looking at. It was manuscripts from the Vilna Gaon that he wanted to come and read something specific, and they found out he's describing this person how there wasn't one iota of his beard that was out of line. Like everything was the most misuder. He said this man was like a walking angel. He was clean, not a speck of dust on it. And he says that then his friends all told me he was a young boy at the time. He goes, like, that was Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. He goes, I had opportunity with my own eyes to see Rabbi Yisrael Salanter. So we once did have these absolute princes. We had these absolute nobility that were in our midst, and they left a lot of lessons for us. And there's still a lot for us to catch up on and hopefully to recapture some of the ideals he was urging Klal Yisrael to live with. And I think this is a perfect building for Shavuos, where we accept the Torah. We all know we say Derech Eretz Kadma Torah, conducting ourselves in a refined manner, conducting ourselves in a proper manner, being worried about the people around us, not being a bull in a china shop. That's a prerequisite for accepting the Torah. So as we gear up and we ready ourselves for Matan Torah, for the holiday when we relive the giving of the Torah, let's also recommit ourselves to be mentioned, to be just good, upstanding citizens, and to try to do the best we can to emulate some of these noble character traits that people who came before us really tried to emphasize and share with Klal Yisrael just how important that is. All right, I wanna wish you. I'm gonna stop the recording. If anyone has anything that they'd like to share, please feel free to do so. Yeah.
Okay, so it just strikes me while you're